So, I don't like giving lessons. I'd rather have conversations. I appreciate and expect audience participation. So go with that. It sounds like everybody here has had a fair amount of experience with humanism and or atheism in one form or another. How often have you thought about it as an actual philosophy of life, something that you use to guide decisions that you make, some of the principles or values along those lines?
I'll say that I normally use humanism in conjunction with another perspective. By itself, I don't actually know how to use it as a guideline. So like, I often use those humanism and stoicism together. Can't think of a specific example of how I use it right now, but just I use it in conjunction with other perspectives as a guideline.
Yeah. That's the most common approach, I think, is humanism and something else. I use humanism and existentialism primarily, kind of working together. Does anybody else blend things together? Yeah.
I find the Humanist Manifesto to be kind of, unlike a lot of moral codes, scripture, etc., I find it descriptive. You know, it's saying, here are some things, like it says right there, a consensus of what we do believe. Not, here is what thou shalt do.
Right.
So, to bounce off of you and Carla, if you describe kind of my best self, you know, because my worst self is easy to make donuts.
Sure.
But like if you describe my best self, there's this stuff, and then there's applied rationality. So using the many tools that psychology offers us to think better, make better decisions.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah.
No, I think I'm a humanist because I can't see all of them, but I think I agree with all or almost all of the statements. I don't think it necessarily gives you a set of ethics or a philosophy. In the back of my head might be existential sometimes, but something I want to do is build a structure of values that sometimes formally, but I think humanism for me, first of all, is respect for other humans. I don't like the idea of tolerance. I prefer the idea of acceptance. So that for me is, if you're a humanist, you respect other humans, and that's kind of the bottom line.
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of bouncing off the idea of, humanism as a concept versus humanism as an ethical foundation, right? For Jeff, for you, it sounds like the ethical foundation is a little bit more of that rational piece of things, where for somebody else, it might be the Stoic side of things might drive some more of the ethical decision-making process. Does that sound consistent with what you're saying?
Not exactly.
Okay.
Applied rationality is the how.
Okay.
Not the why, but the how.
Okay. So tell me about the why.
The why. So I mean, like I said, like the Humanist Manifesto is a good description of the why. It describes a lot of things I want, a lot of things that motivate me. But it's not like I read the Humanist Manifesto one day and thought, oh, so this is what's right and wrong.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. And I think that would be like uniquely unhumanist, right? But that doesn't mean that there aren't principles in humanism in general, and I think in the Humanist Manifesto that can kind of impact how we live our life, some of the, maybe guiding to some of those hows that might be a little more consistent with how we, why we try to live the way that we live. And I've spent a lot of time on this because I have to write a ton of theory papers on my process to be certified as a chaplain educator. So they're always asking, why do I believe this, or why do I do this action instead of that action? And so for me, I've been going through existentialism, but I also have to go back, I don't have to, but I choose to go back to this Humanist Manifesto to say, okay, well, in the manifesto it says this, and this is meaningful to me, so because of this, I want to do this with my students, or this with my patients. And so I spent a lot of time looking at it. For me, so let's go up to the top before we actually get to the statements. There we go. Perfect. So, you know, the basic definition of a secular humanism there, but for me it's these three pieces that I think the rest of the statements kind of unpack in different ways. That the life stance of humanism is guided by reason, inspired by compassion, and informed by experience, encourage us to live life well and fully. So I think in some ways that's gets to your applied rationality and the guided by reason. There's an inspired by compassion, so we're not just big walking heads walking around, but there is heart, there is emotion, there is feeling and empathy involved in it, and there is, experience. There's a little bit of relativity in this, right? We're making these decisions based on our experience. If you want to go Sam Harris route, the full determinism route of things, based on just how everything is coming into us right now, you're making decisions, it's a kind of a fake free will, or if you go to pure existentialism, we are all free to make our decisions one way or the other. What are your thoughts on those three things? Does that trigger anything for you folks? Spark anything?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is there such a thing as, let's say, Christian humanism? That is, some of these, I know it's in the naturally at the top, but obviously we were talking about Stoicism. I mean, many Christians would say they follow Stoicism and rationality. And I guess when I came to humanism, I came as a materialist because I came out of a Christian background and I was away from that. So, but I wonder, is that even such a thing? Is there a category that these categories have lines that blur?
Yes.
And you don't have to, I mean, I don't know that I have ever sat down and read systematically the Humanist Manifesto and I can say, I agree with every single one of these things.
Right.
And since I don't agree with this one, I'm not a humanist.
Right.
I mean, that's how I read it. So could a Christian say, I can read this and, well, without reading part, I can set that aside, but I agree with the rest of it. And therefore, I'm a humanist too, of a different kind.
Yeah, I mean, so it depends on how purist you want to be, right? We're getting to, and if you're, sitting in on AHA boards and the Humanist Society, who is endorsing each of the chaplains' boards, this is a big, debate in a sense from the purists who, for instance, if you're going through the AHA and you're being endorsed by the Humanist Society as a humanist, we're saying no, you cannot be a Christian and believe in God and be a humanist. Now, if you want to deny the existence of the supernatural and somehow claim that Christian identity and somehow claim that humanist identity, be creative, go with it, I'm fine, right? Yeah.
Well, I think someone like Thomas Jefferson.
Right.
Was he a humanist? Well, maybe not strictly by our definitions, but maybe by his definition he might have been.
Yeah.
He had thought about it.
I mean, it used to be, I don't know if we still do that, when you signed up for, when you became a member of AHA, one of the things they would mail out was the Jefferson Bible. So there is a strong connection, I think, for humanism in America with Jefferson, some of those people that helped found this country, as well as some of those values coming out of the Enlightenment.
I want to play, to Randall's question, I want to play angel's advocate.
Yes, please do.
And, if I were to be a Christian humanist, I would say, look guys, we use the word first. Like, you don't get started in 1933,
right?
And you find what humanist is. There's a tradition of Christian humanism that goes back hundreds of years.
Yeah, I mean, and even as as I use existentialist, and Sartre calls existentialism kind of applied atheism. Existentialism originated with Kierkegaard, who is a Christian scholar. So it's impossible to really be pure one thing or another, right? There's always influences across sides, and that's a part of where I kind of go with that informed by experience piece. So we're coming into our humanism today, influenced by your experience with Christianity and materialism, inspired for me by the Christianity that I grew up with and the existentialism that my dad taught me, that sort of thing. I'm not coming into this moment right now, for me, as a blank slate necessarily. Yeah, Bob?
I'm thinking the word Christian and the word humanist don't have clear absolute definitions where you easily divide everybody as being not one or one.
Mm-hmm.
If you combine the two, you have an even more complex situation. The word Christian has many definitions.
Right, yeah. Depends on how you define Christian. I've had many students who are Christian. I usually do a humanism and pastoral care teaching in my classes when I'm teaching chaplains. And I've had many, especially in the more progressive Christian denominations like UCC or something like that, they read the manifesto and they go, oh yeah, no, this is great. And then I go, well, there's this without supernaturalism. Yeah, well, okay. Everything but that I'm good with, right? So yeah, there are these blurred lines. Jace?
And along those lines, I think the qualified term secular humanism accommodates the possibility that someone could be both humanist and religious if you take out that belief in the supernatural aspect.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And as we're thinking of how we use humanism to impact how we live. I think this is where there's that interplay, right? I don't know anybody that is like, I'm a pure humanist. I live directly from the manifesto every day. But usually people find, I think that's what we're hearing here, is that a lot of our values are reflected already in the manifesto. And as we find pieces in here that we find valuable, as we think about them, we're actually pulled off into other directions that might be a little more tangible, a little more practical in our lives. And so for somebody who maybe identifies as a Christian humanist, they might say, yes, knowledge of the world is derived by observation, experimentation, and rational analysis. I'm on board with that. We can debate whether or not you be a Christian and do that. But they can say, yes, I'm a Christian, this is what I'm doing. And all the rest of the values, I am a humanist as an identity, but when it comes to how I want to live my life, I'm going to let the Christian ethical structure, as they interpret it, drive the ethics that I live. But if we scroll down, we get this paragraph here on ethics, right? And it's not the affirmation, these are called affirmations. They're not like, this is what we do, and these are all subject to change, which makes it hard to be a doctor, right? Like, okay, we might learn something new that says this is not right, or we'll adjust it. But so here ethical values are derived from human need and interest as tested by experience. Humanist ground values and human welfare shaped by human circumstances, interests, and concerns, and extend to the global ecosystem and beyond. Treating each person as having inherent worth and dignity, and making informed choices in a context of freedom consonant with responsibility. So, I mean, for me, as I'm thinking, how do we use humanism to live our lives? This is the ethical affirmation that I think, when I go to, I look at it and I go, okay, what are my interests that are grounding my ethical decision makings? What are the concerns that are driving my ethical decision making? That sort of thing. So as somebody as part of the LGBTQ community, my interests are driven largely by a lot of my experiences in that, and growing up in a place that was not so much LGBTQ friendly. I'm concerned with many of those experiences that many young people have in that environment. And so when I look to how I develop my ethical values, books like that take the LGBTQ experience and applies it to ethics, such as from OSU, there's a book called Queering Freedom, which is really good. It applies LGBTQ to just kind of, what does it mean to be free? Because we're not absolutely free. So that's kind of where I go sometimes with that. So does that spark any thoughts from anybody? Yeah.
Two, promoting dignity, Martha Nussbaum has written a lot about that. And, a lot of the stuff she argues for it fit well with equal opportunity. But if you only look at human circumstances, interests, and concerns, I think conservatives who argue that the free market can best address those. They ignore economists and macroeconomics that it needs to be perfect markets, perfectly competitive markets. But there is an argument that I think leads to ignoring poverty, ignoring dignity that could still fit circumstances, interests, and concerns. And so that's a point of departure for thought, but in another sense it's kind of empty of content. Because there are people who argue that given what human beings are, who we are, that we're always self-interested, that sort of thing. They can have values that most of us probably don't.
Yeah, I mean, so I hear you saying that this statement lacks a little bit for you because it kind of gives some wiggle room to somebody who might not necessarily live into concerns about the dignity of poor, of caring for the poor and needy, that could still maybe identify as a humanist ethical system, but not really to.
Yeah, they would argue that it's not, free markets are not perfect, but they are the most appropriate for human beings and the best that we can do.
Yeah, I would
And
disagree.
then nature is tough.
Yeah, and there's, and I don't know if there's anything inherently, well, I don't want to say this. Yeah. Do I want to defend the humanism other side? Okay, so, I think a part of what makes it harder to be something like that, someone like that, and kind of ascribe to some of these is some other pieces in here. But for here, human need, inherent worth and dignity. I mean, we could make arguments about whether or not capitalism does that or not, right? And I would say that there's a certain level of individual responsibility that capitalism tries to play on, but not necessarily a social responsibility. When we look at other pieces of the Humanist Manifesto, I would argue that when we're talking about responsibility, it's not so much my individual responsibility, but my responsibility to others.
Yeah, I think there needs to be, I don't know whether there is something in there more statement like common good.
Scroll down. Sure.
Yeah, dignity, you can use that to get to some things in terms of social welfare. But arguing for universal health care, I don't think it's a right, I think it's a duty. But it's hard to find an argument for that to sway some people.
So, yeah, I mean, the paragraph that I think really works to your point is this right here. Working to benefit society maximizes individual happiness. We essentially then go straight to progressive, and then reducing suffering, improve society, develop a global community, minimizes inequities of circumstance and ability.
I stand corrected.
No, I mean, if you look at just one paragraph, right?
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but other parts kind of try to address some of those concerns. I'm not arguing that this is a perfect document, right? There's no such thing. This is the top of this document says this is the best snapshot we have of humanism in 2003, and this is, based on a committee writing together. This is what we can agree on, that we all agree on. humanist values. Can make change. You know, they write there's a new humanist manifesto every 40 or 50 years, so maybe in 2043, 2053, we'll have the Humanist Manifesto 4 that is informed by more things that we've learned about in the last 4 years. But yeah, I mean, again, kind of working through the ethics then and how we live our lives, you know, so is what we're doing minimizing inequities of circumstances and ability.
And then look at the first line, the next paragraph.
Yes.
The well-being of all.
Yep. Committed to diversity, respect those differing and humane views, and this is where Randall, I think, your question of, you know, can somebody claim humanism and Christianity? We're not saying that humane views are necessarily unique to us, right? Humane views can be found in all sorts of different places. Even, you know, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, various different other views of the world, you can find humane views in there. Just because they might be theistic in bent doesn't mean we cannot find humane views in there. The boundary line for me would be, there is that first sentence up at the very top that says, for humanist society and AHA, humanists, we're kind of signing on to this idea that this is a humanism without supernatural for us. There is an inherent atheism in this document. So let's think of a problem today. So I parked my car today and grabbed my box and my bag, and a woman came up and said, "Excuse me, sir, you know, I need some cash." You know, I forget what her story was at this point, something along the lines of, I'm stranded here in Columbus and I need to get a bus pass, you know, I lost all my cash, or got here and I didn't have enough cash to buy my ticket back. Do you have any cash for me so that I can buy my ticket back? So, what is a humane response to that?
I had a guy hit me up at the parking lot up there, and I gave him $3 bills I had. But I've also, it's been a long time now, I've read stories about people making a good living panhandling and they go back to their house in the suburbs. So I'm always torn by that, but I usually get something. But I don't think that any of the stories that I'm told are actually true. Meaning I think that there are probably either alcoholics or professional panhandlers, but you never know who somebody is. So I don't give a 20 like I did to one vet who promised to pay me back and I knew he wouldn't. But, so I didn't feel too bad about it. But, I don't get much anymore. I usually get something.
I'm pretty confident in this one. Maybe you can scroll up some. I'm pretty confident, but my confidence does not result in, where's the quote about respect for something dignity?
It's going to be right here. We're committed to treating each person as having inherent worth and dignity.
Yeah, so my confidence is not, yes, you should give, or no, you shouldn't give. I usually don't give. Once in a while I've done so. Once in a while once I had a clip bar and I gave her a clip bar and she took it. You know, but the dignity part is, I'm not going to say fuck off. And I, you know, say that only because some people whom I've known would. You know, I'm going to say sorry, I can't help you. So either way, have dignity, you know, treat them with dignity, make an informed choice. I certainly don't feel that there is a responsibility to pull out $1 and give the person $1. You know, make an informed choice either way.
Right.
And this is a good example of, where I would apply stoicism and humanism. I agree with Jeff on when it comes to human well-being are shaped by circumstances. I've had poor circumstances, people that are either homeless or people panhandling. So, well, I can't, like, I use stoicism to go put myself, create a distance, you know. It would make me feel better to be able to help these people, but I cannot. And I would like to show this person dignity, but that's been dangerous for me in the past. So that's when I'll just walk past them, or, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not ascribing this to what you feel unsafe about, but, you know, when I pose this question to women, there's been a high concern of safety in these kind of situations, as opposed to me as a male. So, I mean, I'm not saying that is what your fear is about, but that, yeah, I mean, that's,
I mean, sometimes it's women, yeah.
right, that in these cases, that's,
Yeah. But I think that's a good example of using something else with humanism.
Carl, were you gonna say
I was
something?
going to say, I think it was Doug Stanhope said, at first I thought he was going to use it on drugs and alcohol. Then I realized that's what I was going to use it for, so why am I being such a judgy ass? But yeah, I mean, my role is usually, I'll give him a couple bucks if I have it the first time. I did have one guy recently in the last couple of months that I will give him, like, the audacity that he had, I was honestly impressed with, because I gave him like $10 and I was like, all right, man, you told me a good story. I'm pretty sure it isn't true, but here you go. And he came back, he saw me walking back to work and said, "You're never going to believe what happened." He gave me this story about losing the money, and I was like, buddy, I hope your day goes better, but I don't got anything for you at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was at a meeting in Chicago one time, and I had a guy come up to me and tell me how I looked like a weightlifter. And
Well,
it was really building me up, and I just enjoyed that so much. I gave him money for entertainment.
Yeah.
So if you really want to tick them off, suggest places they can go for help, or give them a list of places,
Right.
which is what I might do in the future.
I was waiting for a bus at Spring and Front, which is like 3 blocks from here. And I, for the first time in my life, wondered what would happen if somebody were to steal my backpack, my wallet, and my phone. I would be standing there with no ID and no way to get home. How would I convince somebody walking by that I really was in that situation?
Yeah. I mean, just because it's been a story used by somebody else to con us doesn't necessarily mean that the story we're being told is in fact a con. Randall, you had a question first.
It's not a question, it's a little bit different spin on this scenario. I had the experience recently, last couple, 3 months, of I waited at a bus stop and there was a homeless man there who he was in a wheelchair. And he never panhandled me, but he'd like to talk. And he kind of came to see me as someone he could talk to. And so I was kind of polite, I would listen, but I didn't really engage him very much. And some people would engage a little more, but I tried not to that much. And eventually I just got to be honest, annoyed by this. And so I stopped going to that bus stop. And I think that I volunteer at the Van Buren homeless shelter, help serve meals once a month. And I think, well, what a hypocrite I am. Am I a hypocrite?
Say more about that.
Well, I go and I do my good deed once a month. I lead my comfortable middle-class life, and I go down there and I give them the benefit of my great good work, and I serve them a meal for a couple hours, and I clean up things, and I go back to my comfortable middle-class life. And yet when I can't tolerate a man at the bus stop who wants to be friendly. And yeah, I just throw that out there. I mean, I'm sure I'm not the only person in the world who's had this experience. And so, am I a hypocrite? Yeah, maybe I am a hypocrite. So what does that mean?
So a couple of takeaways, I'll kind of segue in response to that, the thing I was saying as well. Many years ago, I worked full-time in a homeless shelter. a couple of takeaways from that. One, speaking to what you said, Randall, is I felt like what I did was useful. I felt good about it. Some of the residents I interacted with were not people I would have chosen to associate with, if I could avoid doing so, in my personal life. I didn't feel like a difference. There's not an inherent responsibility to be the friend of anyone you meet. I don't think so. As we think about a situation like this one, going back to, observation, experimentation, analysis, try to dissociate in your mind, if you haven't already, homeless and panhandling. Most homeless people actually don't panhandle. Many don't look homeless. A homeless person may have sold you your coffee this morning if you bought coffee like I did, or have been working behind the counter of the gas station. And like we mentioned before as well, panhandlers aren't necessarily homeless. If you want to help homeless people, it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with panhandlers.
Yeah. I mean, you'll allow me to segue into some experience from my life that I was going to draw on, in that as my wife and I were leaving the cult, that's another story altogether, but through that process, we experienced homelessness. Otherwise, we didn't have a home of our own. We had a friend who happened to have an empty apartment. We had no furniture. It was all in storage. We just kind of laid out on the floor. We couldn't keep our dog in there, so our dog spent the night in our car, so that she would at least have shelter. But if you were to look at me, you would never know that I was experiencing homelessness. You would never know. My kids still went to school the next day. There was still kind of an open, I wouldn't say hiding, but we don't, people experiencing homelessness don't necessarily look like the person on the street, right? And they're not necessarily one and the same. So for me, when I come to this sort of thing, yeah, it's about the inherent worth and dignity of the person asking. Fortunately, in the digital age, I had never carried cash. I rarely carried cash. So when people ask me for cash, I can honestly say, I'm so sorry, I don't have any cash on me. If I did have some cash, I honestly would probably give them a few bucks. For me, I think there's a balance of two responsibilities. There is the individual responsibility that I have to this person right now who may need this money for food, clothing, the alcohol, the beer that I was going to buy at, Tip Top, that can go to this person. It's not a big deal to me. I'll buy another one. But there's also a social responsibility in that. I think the only way to solve hunger or homelessness or something like that is by giving this person a few bucks whenever I feel bad about it. That's a low level of responsibility. I think there's also a social responsibility, getting to your point of saying, yes, I feed the person today, or I do something for the person in front of me, but I'm also doing something for the long term that I see as being a long-term responsibility of changing society so that we minimize people experiencing homelessness. We minimize people who are panhandling because they need to make their ends meet. So another situation. What time are we? Yeah, cool. Everybody familiar with what's happening at Mount Carmel? Okay. If you're not, you're not. Okay, so let me fill you in. Mount Carmel is on notice from the people that give the money out for Medicare and Medicaid because it came about that one of their ICU docs would prescribe an overdose of fentanyl to their patients who were actively dying, as we say in the hospital system. They were not going to survive. They were withdrawing life-sustaining treatment, and they were moving them to comfort care. But instead of letting the comfort care run its course, meaning the person might die in a day, an hour, not really knowing, this person would prescribe an overdose of drugs. And the nurse, knowing that this was an overdose of drugs, and the pharmacist who filled it, knowing this was an overdose of drugs, fulfilled the prescription, the nurse got it, gave it to the patient, and essentially killed the patient with overdoses. The patient never felt any extra pain. Instead of dying in 10 hours, they died in 2 hours. And they ended up, I think at this point they found 34 patients that this has happened to. The doctor has lost his license. They fired a bunch of people because of this. Now, I'm a person who is an advocate for physician-assisted death, but so in some ways, I am sympathetic to this gentleman's motivation, but I have problems with the way that he carried it out. I don't know what other people's thoughts.
Did the patients not have any influence on that decision?
None. They were tricked, or they were completely out.
Nor did the family have any involvement.
The family did. The only decision that the family had was, I know my loved one will not get any better from this position, and this is not a quality of life that the person wanted. And I know that by withdrawing care, so taking them off a breathing machine, removing the medication that maintains the blood pressure, this person will die. My loved one will die. And the hospital is going to do everything they can to keep this loved one comfortable while the natural process occurs. So that does include injecting some morphine to help reduce anxiety. People can feel like they are drowning, and so the morphine kind of helps assuage some of that anxiety, some of those feelings, as well as other painkillers. So in one sense, if you were to be an outside observer, nothing would look awry.
Do the family or surviving members, whatever, are they still paying for this care? Will the person's at end of life?
Yeah, so in theory, I mean, I don't know what Mount Carmel's billing practices are, right? But in theory, up until the point of death, the families and their insurance company would be on the hook for the amount of care.
Do we have any certain knowledge of the doctor's motivation? Because I feel like we just assumed.
Yes.
Or did he say anything about it?
Repeat that.
I'm asking if we know the doctor's motivation.
To my knowledge, she hasn't said anything particularly. Yeah, I'm making an assumption of what his
Because I
motivation
can think of, I mean, I can think of the reason that you mentioned, but I can think of several other possible motivations.
Mhm.
Yeah.
For example?
Probably more
For-
of the story.
Like, the hospital is losing a lot of money,
Yeah.
and because these bills, a lot of these bills don't get paid, and if they don't spend, whatever the night cuts off, if they don't spend an extra night
Mhm.
in this ICU,
Mhm.
if we cut their stay short,
Mhm.
then the hospital will save money.
It actually would go the other way, but yeah. If you get them into that 1 hour after the cutoff, and then they get a whole day of Medicaid payment for the care, and then you kill them at 6 p.m. instead of 5 p.m., they actually make
But
more.
what if they're uninsured?
Well, if they're uninsured, yeah.
I'm just
But I
saying-
mean, you would charge it through Medicaid.
I'm just saying there could be scenarios
Mhm.
in which there was some less benevolent
So,
intention.
just to trouble the waters a little bit. So let's say let's make a fictional hospital, so we're not getting sued by Mount Carmel. So let's say there is a hospital who is financially strapped, and the ICU doc, being aware of this, does make some of these decisions. But if he did not make those decisions, the hospital would actually close down, and thus not be able to provide care to the other people in the community.
Well,
Too bad.
I mean, if I'm facing losing my house,
Mhm.
if I'm in danger of losing my house, maybe I should put a gun to your head and take your money.
Yeah, I mean, this is a fair point. I unpack that for me. I think I know what you're saying. But
That yes, you could, you certainly could attempt to justify that, but we do have these things called laws,
Mhm.
you know,
Mhm.
for a purpose of saying you don't just get to decide unilaterally, I'm going to sacrifice your right to this financial need.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Well, I support physician-assisted suicide. Actually, I support suicide in principle. I don't see why I should have to wait until I die of natural causes, because I don't want to. But I'm against anybody killing somebody else, even for apparently good reasons. The decision belongs to the person. If they're unconscious, it belongs to the people they give the responsibility to. So, I would hate to see a hospital close. It's needed, but murder is murder.
sorry to keep raising my hand, but it just occurs to me why I care so much about hearing this story.
Yeah.
If I'm gonna drop a little personal stuff here.
Absolutely.
I got a call from my mom last May that my father, who had had pancreatic cancer for quite a few years, was in very bad shape. And I got on the plane that morning and took 3 planes, got there to the hospital by 7 or 7:30 or 8 in the evening, and he died early the next morning. If he was still conscious, although in a state of some degree of delirium when I got there, even if he wasn't conscious by that time, I think I might have valued, like, being here while he was still breathing and so forth. So if I had taken those 3 planes and got to the hospital and he was no longer alive because that doctor made that decision, that's kind of giving me some feelings, that scenario.
Yeah, I can understand.
And that's giving me some feelings. I could totally imagine in this Mount Carmel scenario,
Or a generic hospital.
any hospital, some family member rushing. Because things can happen in so many different ways. Sometimes they're predictable, sometimes they're very unpredictable. But I can imagine some family member rushing by car, by plane, whatever, to get to that hospital to say goodbye.
Yeah.
And I completely agree with your point where it's like, this could have been avoided if there was something written down beforehand that said, if I ever get to the state, then just, relieve me. But the consent there just leads to very tricky.
Yeah, so, power of attorneys are a little tricky in the state of Ohio, they're not really all that great, but, or living
Durable are
wills.
better in that scenario.
Yeah, or living wills are even more vague and less able to be used, but in the living wills and in the powers of attorneys, you can put in there instructions of, if 2 doctors agree that, if they can't get a hold of my decision maker and 2 doctors agree that there's no way that I can make any meaningful recovery, doesn't define what meaningful recovery is, but if meaningful recovery, you are allowed to transfer me to comfort care. So I don't know if any of these theoretical patients had that order, but at the same point, transitioning to comfort care is one thing, rejecting them with whatever drug to speed that along is another.
Physician-assisted death is what it's called. That's not legal in that order.
Not the Ohio.
States,
Not
yeah.
in Ohio.
Yeah.
So could you theoretically, in your power of attorney, have an instruction say, if I'm transferring to comfort care, I would like a physician-assisted death as well, or?
I don't know the legality of that, that's a good
Not
question.
here?
Not here.
But
And like
if
it-
it were like in a different state, like that's,
I don't think so, but I don't know the legality,
okay.
to be honest. I can't speak to that.
I would look into Oregon, and there may be other states
Yeah,
that
I know most of
might
the
have a chance
states
there, but not here.
say that you have to be awake and alert within 6 months of your prognosis of death. So it's the same criteria that they have for transitioning to hospice. So before you transition to hospice, the physician has to say, yes, this person is likely to die within the next 6 months.
I just personally haven't looked into it at all because I know we need to work on it legislatively here first.
Yeah.
A lot of steps, but
Yeah.
something to think about.
Well, it's very dignified on your own end-of-life plan.
Yeah.
And death with dignity is a very big ethical stance for humanism. If you look to the AHA, when they look like what are we about, one of the ethical things that the AHA is working on a lot is this death with dignity stuff. Yeah.
I mean, I was a little familiar with it. I had no idea about the Mount Carmel tie, and I'm really uneducated on anything hospital related or not related. But aren't there things like a physician's oath, whether it's written or unwritten, on what they should do? If you remove the emotional attachment
Right.
out of it, which I can very easily fall victim to, which is why
Well,
I'm
the
not.
Hippocratic Oath is, I shall do no harm.
Oh.
Death is a harm. Although you could argue in that
On the island,
situation,
yeah.
Yeah.
but if they're comfortable, if they're unconscious, they're not being harmed.
And most of the studies that I've seen on like what's going on in Oregon and stuff is that people who went to the physician-assisted death will get the prescription of medication when they go into hospice, but never use it because they've been kept comfortable and they've not seen the need for it. But it provides them comfort because they know they're in control. If it gets too bad, they have the option of doing this. But most people actually die in hospice without using medication.
Because how do you look at it with an unbiased view as far as, no, I could be sending this person to heaven, or I could be sending them to hell, let's keep them alive.
I mean, yeah, so there are many, I could give you many patient examples where.
Yeah, this could go on forever.
Yeah,
I'm
but
just so else.
but I mean, I was going to transition,
Yeah.
I mean, all of my, because I'm a hospital chaplain, most of my examples are medically related, right? But, there are family members who the physician, all of the physicians say this person is not going to have any meaningful recovery. They've had a heart attack and, they did not have enough blood to their brain for enough time. Are they legally brain dead? No, there might be a little bit of stuff going on in the brain stem, but they are not going to recover meaningfully. Family decides to trach and peg them, so they do artificial food and artificial breathing permanently. Are they suffering? Not likely. I mean, they're going to be highly medicated and sedated. In one sense, it doesn't really harm the patient because the patient is not really knowing what's going on. On the other hand, is it humane to keep this person alive in that status of death?
Well, they just had stories about a woman who's been unconscious for 30 years. Who got pregnant. 30 years is a long time to just be laying in bed.
And we've had people who, maybe nothing so dramatic. Let's bring it back a little bit. Where, Jeff, if it's all right, I can build a little bit on your story.
Sure.
Where family members have been trying to get to the hospital to be with their loved one before they die, and the goal of the hospital has been, okay, we're going to do everything we can to keep this patient alive until their loved one gets there to say goodbye. So again, the patient's not feeling any pain, but we're doing everything we can to keep that person physically alive until we get there to say goodbye, so that you don't have that emotional trauma necessarily of just this. So there's competing ethical situations there, right?
And often the everything we can is pretty standard. It's not necessarily surgery. It's,
Right.
Plug this fluid in and plug this thing in and plug this thing in.
Mhm.
It's, it's not like you're doing a lot of hacking and slashing most of the time.
Right. So, yeah, let me complicate it a little bit more with some theology of not humanist, but elsewhere, different kind of theology. So, is it ethical? So, here's the situation. A guy came over from India to visit his family, had a heart attack, and was essentially in continuous CPR and was in the ICU. They were giving him all the medication, suppressors to keep his blood pressure going, and that counteracts some of the pain medication. So the pain medication and the blood pressure medication kind of work at odds with each other. Pain medication decreases your blood pressure, and so you're trying to get more blood pressure medicine in there. Eventually you get to a tipping point where you have to pick one side or the other. The nurses and the docs felt they were torturing this patient because the family was saying, keep him alive, do everything you can to keep him alive. And the medical staff knew this guy was not going to live. Not going to live. And because they couldn't manage his pain properly, there was not the point of, he is not in pain. He was definitely having some pain. You could tell it by the way he was moving, things along those lines. So they called the chaplain, which was me. We show up, and as I'm talking with the family, they had talked to the temple back home. The priest in the temple said, if this gentleman dies between, I think it's 6 a.m. and noon, is his most auspicious time for him to die in order to either get to a better plane in the next life or get to nirvana in general. So That's what the family was looking for. The family wanted their loved one to be alive long enough that he died within this 6 o'clock window.
Did times play a part in
I think the priest had calculated for the Eastern time zone. Yeah.
And the assumption was that the guy who had the heart attack shared those beliefs.
Yes. It was from the fathers, that patient's temple, is that patient's priest.
So do we, the next of kin, if there's nothing written, you know, power of attorney, living will, all that kind of stuff,
Mhm.
there's a next of kin, right? There's a
Mhm.
certain diagram or whatever of who the next
Yep.
of kin is, husband, wife, kids, whatever.
Yep.
And the legal philosophy, stop me if I'm wrong,
Mhm.
is the assumption is that person would be best poised to know
Mhm.
what the non-communicative patient
Right.
would have wanted,
Right.
So if we're going on that, was there a spouse there, or?
Yeah, the spouse was there, didn't speak English, she was communicating us via her sons. There's also cultural conditions of women not being able to really have interaction with other men in the family, but the sons were being kind of the go-between between the wife and the medical staff.
So I think it's reasonable, benefit of the doubt reasonable to say that this next of kin would know that if this person could speak, he would want this thing.
This was exactly what he wanted, 100%. Yeah.
I say they should keep him alive till a propitious time. That's human dignity. It's not, it might be painful, but it's probably what he wanted.
Carly, you seem,
this is just a very tough
yeah.
conversation. I don't know what the right answer is. At some point, I really feel for the person who's suffering. I don't think that they should be suffering more. At the same time, you can be traumatized if someone's leaving you too soon.
Mhm. So what we did, I'll give you the end of this story. What we did was I relayed this to the team, and I agreed with you. I said, you know, this is this person's theology. We have no right to cause spiritual trauma to his family members who would think, oh, we missed him from getting to the next life in an appropriate way, whether or not we believe that to be real and or rational. And once they got that cultural understanding, the nursing staff and the doctors took it as a challenge. Right? They saw it as, well, then, God damn it, we're going to do this. And sure enough, yeah, so they took care of the medications, they did all the calculations. The pharmacist did the calculations so that they would know exactly when they would have to wean off the blood pressure medicine to transition to just full-on pain medication, so that he would die likely within this block of time. And sure enough, he did. He died at the most auspicious time for him, and family was happy.
If they did all that and he died after him, then it was on the gods.
It was on the gods. We tried. We did everything we could for Dad to make this happen, and fate intervened otherwise. But for me, so let's bring this back home to humanism, right? So, for me, that's when I get back to those three things: inspired by compassion. I'm going to flip them around a little bit. Inspired by compassion, informed by experience, guided by reason. So when I showed up to this situation, I was both. I kind of was the nurses and doctors, right? I was kind of angry at the family, and I was sympathetic to the moral trauma of the medical staff that they were experiencing, being asked in their mind to torture this patient. And so I went into the talk to the family with the mindset of, okay, I'm going to work with their theology to get this turned around so that we can, withdraw care on this person now. But as I understood their theology and philosophy more, I was like, okay, I can't really do that because I'm being informed by their experience, right? I'm being informed by their cultural understanding of things, despite my own morality and ethical system. And then I had to make a decision based on the reasoning of their experience, so that I was not making it based on what I felt was rational, which I argue was in fact rational, but based on their experience, their culture, the life and the framework that they were coming from, was this decision reasonable? In my mind, it was yes. And so that's the path I took.
Do you think that was tolerance or acceptance?
Acceptance. Yeah. I share your hackles going up around the words of tolerance over acceptance.
So I don't know if utilitarianism or consequentialism were specifically mentioned in the Humanist Manifesto, but just in case anyone doesn't know, utilitarianism, maximize happiness, relieve suffering. Is, do whatever, the best thing for those outcomes. So, I mean, if I or my mom think about my dad's last 2 days, we think, fortunately, none of the problems we're talking about here, like he was very well treated in ICU, at some point they put him on comfort care, just like we were talking about. So if you think about the last 2 days, we think there wasn't any unnecessary suffering. There also weren't any overdoses of fentanyl, but there was no unnecessary suffering. So, and that goes on much longer than a few hours. That families think of it, which they will probably sometimes for the rest of their lives. They could say, the hospital helped us for him to live long enough to have the best outcome we wanted. So I'm pretty confident that happiness from that outweighs the suffering.
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to take a utilitarian outlook on it, that's definitely a way to look at it. So, yeah. So for me, humanism does, I think, can provide an ethical framework, right? Depending on how we look at it. I think it is also a framework where we can fill it with other things, stoicism, rationalism, existentialism, Christianity, in fact, if somebody so desired. But even on its own, I think it offers at least a way to go, okay, I'm in this situation, what are my humanist values? In here it doesn't mention utilitarianism directly, but it does talk about creating the most good for the most people, which is a utilitarian value. So, you can easily go and go, okay, here's the situation, here's the values I'm living from. This seems to me to be the best direction given the situation. Whether free will exists or not, you're still responsible.
I was just to say, I think your example is a good example of how compassion means different things in different circumstances. Humanism allows for you to look out, choose which one is the best. Maybe I'll think about this is tough.
Yeah, I mean, and
We need more than an hour.
yeah, and life isn't
Yeah.
easy, right? I mean, we're often faced with tough decisions, not necessarily as difficult as the examples that I give, but I kind of go to extreme examples so that we can kind of deal with some ways of how this plays out in sort of real tangible ways.
And I think a lot of us are still coming out of that, or we were there, where we want closure, where we want certainty. That's kind of what religion was about. And there are some questions that are just going to get answers. There are some uncertainties that won't have closure. Like going back to the question you posed, which I forgot how you phrased it, about homelessness. My only answer I can give you is I don't know. Because it's different.
Right.
Like if I'm in Carla's situation, it's definitely different, but I enjoy walking the streets at night alone. I have that privilege. And I'll still get approached, even when I have my coat on and my sunglasses on at night, power walking. I still get approached, I would avoid me if I was somebody else. But it's different, and I understand that. And there's just some things I probably can't ever answer.
Right.
But we come from that background and we have to.
Right. Yeah, we're
And I'm still suffering from that. I still suspect myself.
Very evolved.
Yeah.
Very evolving. And if I can be a little critical of our Enlightenment forebearers, I think the Enlightenment kind of geared us up for a little certainty in the West.
For a what?
Certainty.
Okay.
And while we are still greatly influenced by, and many of us say we're trying to live out of some of the values that come out of the Enlightenment, certainty, I think, is one of those tricky ones where I think life isn't certain. Life is messy. you know, maybe if we had the math and the physics and the chemistry all down, we could calculate exactly what was going to happen and figure that out, but we don't.
But once you do, you find out there's something else that tells
Right.
you you're wrong. You're like,
Right.
yeah, you're right.
Yeah, so, you know, we're kind of, yeah, I mean, my critique of the Enlightenment is life is not as certain as necessarily what was envisioned out of that space.
Could you expand on that a little? Because I always thought of the Enlightenment as more of the scientific revolution, in that there certainly, I think, was some perfectionism in it, but that was eventually. It wasn't now. And so there might have been certainty that we can perfect ourselves in society, but I don't know. I guess I'm wondering what kind of certainty you saw in the late 1700s.
Yeah, there was, I posted a quote that became very controversial in other circles of atheist, I'm blanking on his name, the last atheist to be tried under the perjury law in England, about attaining perfection with a capital P, and how we go about that. And I think if you look at even atheistic language that was being written at that time, we talk about nature with capital N, like if this is a tangible force that we can calculate and figure out. That's a part of our categorization even of, you know, phylum, genus, species. This is all coming out of an understanding that there is an order to the world, a certainty that we can figure out, which in some cases we happen to have gotten it right, in other cases not so much. And I think coming to modern day here, this is a bit of my critique of the hard determinism. Hard determinism is assuming a certainty that from other understandings of neuroscience and other understandings of chemistry is not necessarily there. Can I understand why? I mean, I am not Sam Harris. I don't have Sam Harris's training. I don't have his philosophical, you know, foundation. I can understand why and how he gets there.
Who?
Sam Harris is a big atheist, determinist. He's written The Moral Life and other things along those lines. Yeah.
Does hard determinism mean, to clarify, if we could know everything that is, we therefore would know everything that will be?
Yes. Yep. And that's when I'm saying if we had the right math, you know, all the math, all the physics, all the chemistry of the universe, the theory is we could go back to we can calculate back to the Big Bang, and we can calculate all the way forward. And we know in this case, given that all of the butterflies and dusts and everything are going on now, we can say absolutely Ben was going to be here on this day saying these words right now because of X, Y, Z, you know, da, 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 da.
I personally don't want to have that knowledge.
Right, yeah, you know, yeah.
Thanks.
That's a whole nother discussion.
That's a whole nother discussion, yeah. But for me, so I see the certainty from the Enlightenment, I think, getting played out in modern day life, even in different places, that I think is trying to contain some of the messiness of life. Evolution is inherently messy. Evolution is inherently suffering, if you're going to put a value to all of the death and dying that has to happen for evolution to progress. It just is, you know, and when we try to contain it, I understand why, because we like to have nice packages in our life. I think it's a part of the human condition is to find patterns and put them together and try to say, okay, I know what's going on now. But life is messy, evolution is messy. We can do our best, but I think we need to hold everything, our certainty, with a little grain of salt. But I will definitely say there's no God, unless I'm proved otherwise.
But is there free will?
I would say yes. I take a middle ground. If you want to read somebody who's on the middle, Daniel Dennett has a book called Freedom Evolves, which is a really, really solid kind of middle ground argument.
I need to reread it, but I hated it. I think he misdefined free will in the beginning. And I read a short review that said his conclusion was because of quantum physics we have free will, which is complete bullshit. The fact that things are probable doesn't mean that there's probability involved doesn't mean you're making a choice. So I need to reread it. I'm sure I still hate it. But.
Yeah.
Well, I think he defined free will in a way that made sense for free will to be possible. Like, I think the normal definition of free will is kind of incoherent.
Well,
And so
he seems to define it as we are more free the more choices we can make, and we can make more because our brain is bigger. Or the more information we can have, not choices. But for me, free will is that there is a moment in which you actually decide, and you pick the reasons. You're not forced by the reasons.
It's sounding like free will is a bit like Christian humanism, or whether a taco's a sandwich.
yes. And, you know, for me, this is all like, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Christianity and Christian history. I mean, you've got the Calvinists, the hard determinists on one side, and you've got the Arians, the hard, free will Christians on the other side. And I think we kind of, the secular world is not necessarily devoid of that same argument. Have staunch existentialist free will, people who say we are absolutely free will, we must be free in order to have any kind of accountability and responsibility. So my experience of freedom is that I'm absolutely free, so we must be free. And you have other people that would go to the whole other side of things. And the truth is like this.
If there's no free will, there not only is no meaning in the universe, you can't create any meaning.
Sam Harris would argue. That's all I got, guys. I don't know what time we're at.
127.
127. Jace?
Are you aware of any movement that might be occurring to expand humanism to what might be termed sentientism, so that it's not strictly focused on humans? Or you might put sentient beings anywhere that human can be found in this document?
Let me see if I understand. By sentient beings, you mean animals, or do you mean like in the future, like transhumanism, like our consciousness in a computer, or something along those lines?
Either one, really. Just anything that doesn't restrict these values to humans.
Towards the animal direction, yes. Can't remember the name of the group, but there is in fact like a environmentalist human group that has done just that, has moved the speciesism of humans from the humanism, and has included all living creatures as having worth and dignity as all living creatures, being valued and those sorts of things. Towards the transhumanist side, I'm less familiar with that. I think inherent within transhumanism, you could argue, is this idea of the value of that which is not human, or not entirely human.
Well, it makes sense that we're dealing with non-human animals now, because they're around now, whereas we don't have sentient robots or computers yet, so it's not something to deal with.
Yeah. I mean, and plant biology currently is doing some really crazy things with plant sentiency. I mean, you can argue, there are studies that show that plants can listen, that plants can remember and learn things, that plants, so.
They adapt to moving from predators.
Yeah.
They can adapt themselves to
Yeah.
that.
So, is there a speciesism in saying that plants are unsentient because they don't have a nervous system that we define from a mammalian animal realm of things, when some of the evidence is suggesting that there is some level of intelligence going on.
I guess that might be sort of an intersection between Buddhism and humanism.
Yeah, it does say like that concerns extend to the global ecosystem. That seems to at least partially address that.
Yep.
It's also going to plug into next month's program.
Yeah.
It's finding life in the universe.
There you go.
So
It's going to
say this is another topic.
Yeah.
It'll take like 2 hours.
Yeah.
Okay. That's good.
All right, so thanks everybody for being here.